this shape appeared in the sky above, and I had myself and my navigator and also a ground crew member, and this shape started to appear and was very distinct. It was a sort of Concorde shape wing pointing north-south and with lights pulsating all the way around the perimeter.
This is Cold War Conversations, and if you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand accounts of the Cold War. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so you don't miss out on future episodes. Cold War RAF pilot Jeremy Lane shares his gripping experiences from nuclear bombing missions to a close encounter with a UFO. He was trained to fly the Canberra aircraft on nuclear bombing missions and describes how the American weaponry they would have used required dual control from both the President of the United States and the British Prime Minister. Jeremy also describes the quick reaction alert duties where aircraft were always on standby, ready to fly their nuclear missions at a moment's notice. He shares his experiences with escape and evasion training designed to prepare pilots for the possibility of being shot down over enemy territory. The training included water survival exercises, evading capture, and how to stand up to enemy interrogation. The episode concludes with a truly extraordinary story, a close encounter with an unidentified flying object. During a night flight exercise, our guest, his crew, and other aircraft witnessed a mysterious pulsating object in the sky. I'm delighted to welcome Jeremy Lane back to our Cold War conversation.
Anyway, by the time I got out to Germany, the aircraft had been converted to carry an American weapon, which was somewhat more versatile in that you could dial in the yield. So it could be programmed to produce a different yield depending on SACR's requirements. And it could be dropped at low level. You didn't have to climb up. So obviously an aircraft that is doing a labs maneuver is very vulnerable at the point where it's doing the maneuver. And we called it a lay-down weapon. So we practiced all our dropping of practice bombs on ranges was designed to simulate dropping this American weapon, which had a spike on the front. So when you dropped it, spike came out and a parachute. So it would retard the weapon, and the spike was intended to go into the ground. And the explosion didn't happen immediately. If somebody had been brave enough and gone and walked up to the bomb, they could probably have pulled it out of the ground. I don't know, but
that's an unenviable task.
But anyway, no, I think joking aside, we were supposed to escape at 450 knots. And the bomb would then go off about 30 seconds later, so you get some distance away before the weapon exploded. And it was a dual control weapon, so unlike the British weapon, which was controlled by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, in this case the weapon was controlled by the President of the United States and British Prime Minister, so it needed both. It needed both leaders to initiate the attack and the launch. And we had Americans clearly on site. The bomb storage was controlled completely by the Americans, nothing to do with the Brits. Once the weapon was loaded onto the aircraft, it became a responsibility of both the Brits and the Americans to secure it, to make sure nobody got at it, and also ensure that when it was ready to go, it would go. So we had a whole release process involving an American officer who would receive his coded instructions from the United States, and he would then release the weapon himself, and then the Brits would have another set of codes to release the weapons from the Prime Minister, and that's how the nuclear deterrent was maintained and also controlled. And I'm sure these nuclear codes, so on, I'm sure they're still carried about. I think, somebody follows the Prime Minister every day, wherever he is, with a bag and the codes. It's all, it's all, I think it works the same way. It doesn't change very much.
You were on quick reaction alert.
Yeah, we were. We were on QRA. There were 4 squadrons in Germany. There were 2 at Laarbruch, one at War RAF, and one at Bruggen, in addition to the PR squadrons, which also operated out of these.
Photo reconnaissance, PR.
Photo reconnaissance, yeah. So we were on QRA 365 days a year. We had 2 aircraft. Each squadron had 2 aircraft ready to go, assigned to different targets, we assume. Strangely enough, nobody ever discussed this stuff. Even within the squadron, you weren't expected to talk about what your target was or where you were going. It was need to know. You didn't need to know, so nobody told you. But actually, all the QRA aircraft were, if you were assigned to aircraft number 1, for example, whoever sat with aircraft number 1, whether it was you or some of your mates, later in the week, we'd all be going to the same place. So it's the nature of it. The order of battle, as it was called, was set by SACA, and every aircraft had its target location. And in the event that we went to war, that was where we were going. It was a strange world we were living in, really, because the threat was very real. It was when was the Cuban crisis? It was about 1962. Yeah, 62. I was still at school. But, it wasn't that long ago, and it was still all in our minds, and there were nuclear tests going on, and there was very little communication between the East Bloc and the West. And it didn't come down until the Berlin Wall came down, really. But clearly our days were spent learning about the opposition. So a lot of time spent in the bunker studying the latest intelligence reports, bits that we were allowed to see, trying to understand what we were going to go into. So learning about the capabilities of the opposition's air defences, their missile systems. To be frank, we were very vulnerable as Canberras.
So that intelligence information, I guess some of it may have been from BRICSMIS, the British military liaison mission in East Germany, if your targets were in East Germany. Were they predominantly East Germany, Czechoslovakia, or were they even deeper, such as Poland?
Yeah, they were. But obviously we were limited by range. So, they were, no. I can't speak for everybody else. I only know what my target was. It wasn't in East Germany, no, or Czechoslovakia, right. No.
And can you tell me what that target was?
I'm not sure I'm prepared to put that on public record because, it'd be pretty upsetting to some people to know that.
That's fair enough. That's absolutely fair enough. So I just want to go back to QRA and just, what was that experience like, just being on that sort of knife edge and wait? Because if you got the call to go...
Mm-hmm. And we did.
You were going to go.
And we did. But fortunately, they were all practice. But
right.
we did get the call.
Did you know they were practices?
Not always. We never took off with a live nuclear weapon. We were not required to take off. Although I have a great friend who I actually spoke to this morning who did get along the taxiway before they realised that actually it wasn't supposed to go. But it was generally they taxied out, but they didn't take off. I don't think anybody that I know of anyway ever got off.
Yeah.
Got airborne with a live nuclear weapon ready to go. I don't think QRA was always on the ground. It wasn't an airborne cap. We didn't have aircraft flying about with nuclear weapons live ready to go. They were always on the ground, and I think the opposition did the same. I think anybody carrying, it would have been pretty hairy when you think about it. If somebody who had a death wish decided that they were airborne with a nuclear weapon, and hey, listen, I don't like so-and-so, so I'm going to drop it or whatever. I don't know, but you could imagine this. So they were always on. They were always kept on the ground. And sitting in QRA, well, what was it like? I was very young. I was 23, I suppose. You consider yourself to be pretty invincible at that age. That's why they choose young people to do these things, is because if you spent a lot of time thinking about it, you probably never would do it. We used to joke about, people did joke about, when I get airborne, I'm heading west. I'm not going. Okay, I'm going the other way. But no, I think if we'd been called upon to do it, we would have done it. But we were very, very vulnerable aircraft. I suppose we were expected to be enough of us that somebody would get through, but some would get through. But the chances are that, a war starting in Europe would not probably have started initially with nuclear weapons any more than we would expect it to do today. The war would have started
There'd be a build-up of tension.
There would be a lot of that, and diplomatic efforts going on and so on. So and probably there would have been a ground invasion first of some sort. There would have been the Warsaw Pact would have come in on the ground. But the timing of launching a nuclear attack would not have been of our choosing, I suspect, would not have been of NATO's choosing. It would have been started by the other side. Can't say that for sure, but I think we were flying tactical nuclear weapons as opposed to strategic. So we weren't, we were not the big boys. We were going in with relatively small punch.
You were dropping a nuclear weapon, and there was going to be collateral damage with that, even if you're hitting a purely military target.
We certainly knew. We were trained. We were given the information about what our weapon would do. There were a lot of films of tests that had been done to show what the effect of a nuclear weapon was, and pretty gruesome. We had the results of the Japanese weapons, but they were the yield from those was relatively small compared to what we were being expected to drop. And so it was quite sobering. It was sobering. We were trained in nuclear, chemical, and biological protection. Can't say for the Americans and the Brits, but we were certainly not expected to drop chemical weapons or biological weapons. We had none of that. It was nuclear only, and we carried one. There was one white bomb in the bomb bay. That was it. And when we were tasked to fly, you couldn't guarantee the conditions. What time of day would it be? What were the weather conditions like? And you can be sure that if the opposition was going to initiate this war, they'd do it on Sunday morning at 3:00 when everybody had come home from the mess with a headache, and time. Obviously not the guys on QRA, but the else would have been not in probably, and the weather conditions would probably have been absolutely appalling, and our ability to fly at night at low level over ground was very limited. It was, we didn't have any. The Tornado came in after the Canberra and the Buccaneer. The Tornado came in with a ground following radar, but we had nothing. We had absolutely nothing.
Wow. So was your navigator calling out to you, you should see a church coming up or something like that, and then take a different course heading? Or how does that conversation, that teamwork between you and the navigator work at low level?
Good question. Well, we both carried maps. So just the Mark I eyeball. So you would follow a route. You would have planned your route beforehand. And generally speaking, the corrections that you would make on the way wouldn't hopefully be that severe, so that you would expect something to come up. You could see your map, and the navigator would be prone in the front if he was doing a visual navigation. But of course, at night or in bad weather, you couldn't do that. And we did practice without visual reference, but it was very difficult and pretty inaccurate. There was a system called Decca, came after I think something called G, which was operated during the Second World War, but Decca came out with a system which would give you cross-reference, so you get 2 or 3 signals from different Decca base stations, and depending on the reading on the dial, the navigator would read the dial and know where he was, because the lines would cross, and wherever the lines crossed within a certain latitude, if you like, for error, that's where you would be. And so he would take Decca readings as we were flying along, and also that would have been the way that the bomb was dropped on a Decca. Just very, very easily interfered with in terms of
jamming.
Jamming the signals.
Yeah.
And they had, for wartime, there were mobile sites, so they would position mobile Decker sites out in the country somewhere, I don't know where. And they were supposed to be less vulnerable, but frankly, I suspect that they would have been jammed very, very quickly. And that was it. That was the blind navigation system that we had in the aircraft, and nothing else.
Wow.
So it was very, very limited.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've spoken to Vulcan crew, and because they've got this bomb aiming position down there, but they were using a form of H2S, an advanced form that had, the original system that had been in the Lancaster. Mm-hmm. But I asked them, if they had to use that bomb aiming position in the lower part of the aircraft, what system would they use to aim? And one of these guys said, we'd use the TLAR system.
I think something rather. I don't know what it is.
That looks about right. Right. System.
yeah. Well, I think people would be shocked in the day to know how rudimentary. I mean, if we were dropping the nuclear weapon at 250 feet, visually, we had a line of sight gun sight. That's what we had. So the crosshairs would go through the target, and when they went through the target, you drop the bomb. Clearly, with a nuclear weapon, the accuracy wasn't that. It put within, let's say, 200 or 300 yards. I mean, or even probably more than that. It wasn't that important. But that was the method that we had, and we used to. I mean, we dropped practice bombs, which were tin cans, really, designed to represent the flight of a retarded bomb, a retarded nuclear weapon, with a parachute on the back. So, well, it didn't have a parachute; they were just tin cans with a blunt nose, and we carried 4 of those on the 2 pylons, and so you'd have 4 runs down the range, and of course, it was a great competition between all the crews as to how close you get, what sort of results you got, and so on. And that would depend very much on the conditions on the day, and particularly wind. I mean, wind would drop the free fall of a weapon significantly, even a practice one. But it was, we were trying to get a bullseye. And most, I would say, most crews averaged 30 feet, maybe.
Wow. Okay.
30 feet.
That's pretty good.
Flying 360 knots, 250 feet. Yeah, 30 feet would have been. I'm saying that was an average. I mean, I think, we used to have a scoreboard in the crew room, and and you were ranked according to your ability or lack of. But I would say the vast majority of crews were getting to within certainly well inside 60 feet. You think you're flying at that kind of speed. Yeah, I think generally speaking, I would say that. And probably somebody will come up and tell me after they hear this thing, but what a lot of rot he was talking when nobody got one within 100 yards. I think actually, no, I am saying feet, but it wasn't. It was yards. Yeah, they were measured yards. So they were on the ground. They were on the ground in a cabin, in like a control tower, if you like, on range, and they would shout out your, what you got. But you could do a wing over, and you could actually watch, because they had smoke. So there were smoke bombs, and so when they landed, it would let off smoke, and so you could do a wing over and watch. Yeah, you'd know what you'd done. Didn't need to be told.
So you didn't have any way of knowing whether you'd been painted by a SAM site or anything like that. So the only way you'd know that is a big bang.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. It was very rudimentary. I mean, the Canberra would have survived quite a lot of hits, if you like, and it did in Vietnam. I mean, it was a pretty much a survivor, but no knowledge of when one was coming. No idea.
Yeah.
No, we'd have been. We were a sitting duck. Duck, yeah. Especially at night, or in bad weather, you couldn't fly down at 250 feet. That would have been really suicidal. So we'd have been at 500, 600, 700 feet, something like that, hoping not to hit a mast anywhere as you were going along. But yeah, we were not well equipped for the job. The Canberra was at the end of its life. I mean, I saw the Canberra out in an operational frontline force. That was the end of it in 1973, 4, something like 3.
Wow.
I guess. Yeah.
And when you consider it was the direct replacement for aircraft like the Mosquito, and it was still flying in 1974, that's an incredible longevity.
As a frontline operational aircraft delivering nuclear weapons, it was extraordinary, and there wasn't anything to replace. You see, the TSR-2 had been designed to replace it. And the TSR-2 was, as you know, was scrapped by the Labour government. That was the plan, and then they ordered the F-111 as a replacement for the Canberra. And that got cancelled as well. And then we were looking around for what the hell can we put, because we can't keep the Canberra going forever as a frontline operational airplane. We haven't been putting modifications in it for as long as, for years. It's just a survivor. And so the Buccaneer came in. And actually, the crews who flew the Buccaneer loved it, absolutely loved it. It was a very, very great platform, low-level platform, designed to fly low-level, and it was outstanding at that. Useless at high level. I think the ceiling of a Buccaneer was about 23 or 24,000 feet. It wasn't, you couldn't do a high level stuff. But
because it was designed as a Navy aircraft originally. Yeah,
it was.
Air on.
Yeah. I don't know much about the Mark 1 Buccaneer, but the Mark 2 had 2 Spey engines in, and very powerful, and they could fly at 500 knots, I think, at low level, 200 feet, and on a very stable platform. It was a very nice airplane to fly at low level, apparently. Unlike the Canberra, 450 knots, you could be shaken up and down. It's really not a pleasant place to be, but yeah.
I asked you earlier, and I don't think we actually got onto it, but and I think you said you were, but were you vetted in any way before you were put on nuclear weapons, and what was that vetting?
It was called positive vetting. So they had people whose job it was to go and inquire, and what their methods were, I can't really tell you, other than the fact they were pretty invasive in some respects. I remember when I went on my second posting to Germany, which was as wing weapons officer and electronic warfare officer out in Laarbruch, when the Buccaneers came in, the Buccaneer force. I was supposed to go and fly Buccaneers, but they pulled me off and said, no, you're far too good for that. We're going to put you on to, I don't mean that, I was being very facetious. The requirement was for somebody who had operational experience out in Germany, so I was selected from a cast of 1, I believe. But the positive vetting that I had for that was obviously my second time being PV'd, and because I was going to see all information at a higher level, there was more stuff. And so before I went out, I was still flying. Then I did about 3 or 4 months of training before I went out to Germany for this new job, and during which time I was PV'd, and I was called up to an office in London. It's very cloak and dagger stuff. It was really, but anyway, so this guy sat at a desk opposite me. It was just like the films, 2 big bright lamps on the desk. I couldn't see him, but he could see me. And he started to ask me questions, and it was about a lady called, I can't remember what her name was now, but anyway, let's say it was Susan. Oh yes, and so what does the name Susan mean to you? My wife's name was Catherine, so it clearly wasn't my wife. What does the name Susan mean to you? I said, Susan? Well, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, I think you do. It was this kind of, this type of questioning. And it went on for not very long before he realized it was a red herring. But it turned out that one of my best mates, who I still know, he still lives down in Bristol, had been questioned by some investigator. I was known as Jerry in my Air Force days, Jerry Lane. And Jerry Lane, what kind of relationships did he have? I know he was married, but he was newly married. What sort of relationships did he have? And well, I don't know. He was pretty straight, Jerry. I don't think he had. I don't know. He was wasn't very devious in that respect. I think he just. Well, come on, he's a young man. He's surely, good at everything else. And there was this girl. I think before he was married, but this married lady. Oh yes, and that was her name, and so on. And so eventually, it became an interrogation to the point where they thought they got something on me. They never did. So, anyway. But there you are. It was a very invasive process. They went and talked to people and looked at records. And of course, we forget, but there were no computers in those days. I mean, there were, but they were owned by insurance companies or whatever. But I mean, in terms of managing people and doing this kind of work, investigative work and so on, it had to be done. It had to be done by people who walked about with a notebook, and it was very invasive. Very invasive. I mean, people can't imagine a world without computers. We lived in a day in an age where there were no computers. They reckoned that, the Russians, they knew our voice signatures, and I think that everybody, although it seemed like, there were 4 squadrons of strike aircraft. Each squadron had 12 aircraft, probably 18 crews, something like that. So there wasn't that many people that you had to listen to get some kind of idea of the voice signature. So when somebody was flying, you'd say, "Oh, that was him." And I remember being stopped on a motorway in Germany by some guys in another car, open top. I had an open top car, and I was stopped by some Germans. We were still in West Germany, but they clearly, the incident was wanting to photograph me. They wanted to take pictures of me. And I seem to remember I didn't fall for it, because we were educated in what, the sorts of subterfuge and so on that people could use to. And there was a lot of cloak and dagger stuff going on, because there was no other way of getting information. That was the only way people could access information, was pretty much directly. Signals intelligence, yes, of course there was stuff, but I think a lot of it was done in the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, I'm just thinking with the positive vetting thing, I mean, if they speak to somebody who who, I don't know, you've fallen out with, they could have said to the guy, "Oh, yeah, there was this girl, Svetlana, I think her name was."
Yeah, I'm sure they could. But I think we would have needed to be corroborative evidence. It wouldn't have just been the say of one individual. So, although in this particular instance, when I was called up, it was one guy who apparently, you don't know what's going on in the back. The guy is sitting in this office in London. Well, they've got the whole day to pass. Oh, well, we'll get Jerry Lane up, and we might have something on him, so we'll pass the day seeing. I have no idea, but I don't know.
Let's make this a bit more fun.
Who knows?
Put him under the heat.
Who knows? Yeah. And
I was going to ask you. I mean, once you dropped the weapon, what were your intentions then?
Well, we were supposed to recover. I mean, the idea was to go not back to our base, because that would have been usable. That was the expectation. It would not have been usable. Although we did have runway repair equipment on the station. We're supposed to be able to do rapid repair of the runways, but I think that was probably more conventional than nuclear. I think if it had gone nuclear, we weren't expected to get back. And, we had a diversion airfield. And frankly, nobody expected to get there, to be honest. If you'd managed to get through all of that stuff, I mean, the Russians had a lot of anti-aircraft stuff. The SAM-6 in those days was pretty damn new, but I mean, the stuff they got now is just so lethal. I can't imagine how anybody gets through anything. The SAM-6 was a new introduction. They'd got up to that point SAM-2, which was the sort of Vietnam era, and SAM-3 came in, SAM-4. I don't think there was a SAM-5, or if there was one, I can't remember it. But SAM-6, surface-to-air missile system, was very, very, very potent and not a fixed sight, so it could move it around. And radar targeted guns and so on. I mean, it was a lethal environment to fly in.
So your sort of view was this was going to be a suicide mission, whatever way it went, because you were going to not have somewhere to land. Most likely, even if you released the weapon, you're going to get shot down pretty soon.
I mean, the range calculations were such that if we hadn't been shot down, we'd almost certainly run out of fuel. I mean, it was that tight. Yeah. We were due to fly back to an airfield in Denmark, is my recollection.
And were you given training in escape and evasion?
Yes. And I'll tell you a little story about that too.
Great. We love a good story on here.
Well, when I was at War RAF, which was my first posting, I don't remember this discussion, but there was, when I got to Laarbruch, because I was posted from, in my first tour, I was posted from, the Canberras were being phased out. I mean, we were at the end of the Canberra era. And I went up to Laarbruch, and I remember going down into the bunker with the station intelligence officer. That's what he was called. Yeah, station intelligence officer. And he had a bunker within the bunker, with lots of very secret stuff, I suppose. And it was on a one-to-one basis. I wasn't, not even my crew member came in with me and sat me down. And he said, I'm going to show you now something that you're going to have to commit to memory. This is not something you can write down. You can't even write a note down. But when you're flying east, if you are shot down and you manage to parachute out, you will want to know what you're going to do. And this is what you're going to do. You're going to head to this location and make your way as best you can. And you will be met by somebody who will give you this code word, and you will give the code word back. You will then be secreted off to somewhere where can't tell you any more than that. But there's going to be somebody there who will meet you. Well, I treated it as a joke.
Sounds like something out of a Lower Low, to be honest.
It does sound something out of a Lower Low. And I treated it with the contempt that, frankly, it deserved, because the chances of anybody, getting out, knowing where you were when you got out, and having a slightest idea in which direction to head to this location in the middle of a field somewhere in East Germany, and escaping everybody else and finding the man who's, come on, let's just get real here. This isn't going to happen. So I never bothered to commit it to memory. And that was the end of that. But it was completely surreal, really. Anybody even thought that idea up.
Do you think it was possibly an attempt at morale that make you think that there are some options here? It's not necessarily...
Look, as guys who were going to do what we were going to do, it was no different from the guys who, when the whistle blew, they went over the top in the First World War. And most of them knew they were never coming back because they'd seen all their, the previous lot. I think we just didn't really... I mean, did we want to come back to what was going to be left? I probably, I don't know. I feel like that now. We're in the middle of another stupid bloody crisis. Yeah, it's extraordinary, but we're living through this again. And where would I be? Well, currently I live not very far from Brize Norton, and probably I'll walk up to the perimeter fence of Brize Norton when it all happens, and hope that it goes off over the top of me, because I don't want to be around when it's all gone. And I do think that in the current context of what people talking about nuclear war and so on now, I really don't think it will happen, because it is clearly, you're just going to inherit a wasteland, and who's going to thank you for that? And if you think you're going to govern some kind of wasteland afterwards, well, forget it. We'll be back to the Stone Ages. It's just I can imagine, with the controls that there are over those who theoretically have their hand on the nuclear button. Well, nobody actually has their hand on the nuclear button. It's a process to release nuclear weapons, and so I can't think anybody would be that mad to start it off. And I think the Chinese have been very vocal with Putin in telling him, don't start one, because there are no winners in nuclear war.
Did you undergo any escape and evasion training in the field?
Yep. Yes, we did. There was a place down called Bad Kolgrup, which was down in the south of Germany, where we were sent on escape and evasion training, and you'd be out for 4 or 5 nights evading the opposition who were trying to capture you, and then you would be, if you were captured, you would be interrogated, and it was quite brutal, to be honest, very unpleasant. So and it was designed to be, it was supposed to be, name, rank, and number, And that was all you were supposed to ever say. And yeah, they'd have you, they strip you naked in freezing conditions, and then hold you up against a wall. I mean, this was just practice. This was just these were the nice guys. These were our guys who were doing this, but they weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody had to go on that. And I had my first skiing lessons, courtesy of the Air Force, on escape and evasion training. Yeah, learn how to ski. I think the guy who taught me was probably one step ahead in the book, one page ahead of me. Yeah, we did. The answer to your question is yes, we did. Yeah. And we did a lot of stuff in water as well. We were taken out in those days, the Air Force had its own fleet of boats that were taking aircrew out, dumping them in the North Sea with on a parachute harness, dragging them through the water. You to get out of the harness and then put your dinghy up and wait to be rescued by a helicopter. So we did a lot of that kind of training, and frequent revisits to the ejection seat trainer, make sure you were fit to pull the right handle at the right time. There's always a lot of ongoing training. I mean, I think in addition to just the flying training, there was a lot. We did an Oxia training, decompression stuff. Yeah, a lot of stuff that was relevant, and it was important stuff to stay alive. Yeah.
You marry Catherine while you're out in West Germany.
Yeah.
How much of what you were doing could you tell her?
Well, that's a good question. Well, she would have known that I was nuclear tasked, because we had QRA, and there was no secret about what QRA was about. I mean, even the general public, I think, were aware of what QRA was about. So she would have known that. How much would she have known? Well, she wouldn't have known any detail about where I was going or what, that sort of information. And probably, she was young. She was a teacher. She'd come out to teach the children of members of the armed forces. So we had English teachers out there under the British Forces Education Service scheme. And she was one of those. And I think, my mother, we're going back to the Second World War now. I used to ask my mother, well, what was it like when the Second World War, when you were driving staff officers around at night, all very cloak and dagger stuff, because, at night, and all I had was a pinhole in the headlights, and there was no signs, no street signs or anything to tell you where you were or which way you were going. So it was all very exciting stuff. And she said, I really enjoyed it. It was a great war. I really loved it. And I think a lot of people in the Second World War actually had a great time. Certainly that's how she came across to me. It was quite exciting. Whilst Hitler was on the other side of the water, it was exciting times. There was a lot of adrenaline flowing. So, and I think it was the same for us. I think, my job was eventually to train to do a particular task, but the everyday activities of life on a squadron, a frontline squadron like that, was just a huge amount of fun. We did not dwell on the fact that tomorrow we might not be here. I don't think young people do that. I think you might do that when you're a bit older and you've got responsibilities, and But no, I think we engaged in the job with I'd like to think we were professional about it, in as much as we could be, in the knowledge that we had that actually we really didn't have the tools to do the job that we were being asked to do. It was a very surreal world that we were living in, where we were trying to pretend, in a way, that we could do a job. If we'd been asked to do it, it would have been a very, very deep call. Not that I think people wouldn't have done it. I'm sure we'd have gone. I think most people were ready to do it, but sure we were. I'm sure we all were. Nobody would have turned around and gone the other way. But yeah, it was a surreal world, and you couldn't dwell on, everyday life was in the squadron and the mess was about enjoying life. That's what we did, and we did, and we laughed a lot. A lot of very bad behaviour. Not by me, of course, but by my mates, who were really very badly behaved. And so I can say and I still meet up, with my first squadron was 14 Squadron, first operational squadron, and I still meet up with the remnants of that squadron, and there are now, I think there's 7 of us left in the who get together, and it's still, they're still telling tales out of school, and there's still a big laugh. My next meeting is going to be in Spain, because one of the crew's guys remaining, who's younger than I am, I have to say, not many of them are, and he lives out in Spain, so we're going to go and have a few days out there with him, and we'll be surely going over old war stories. That's all. Yeah.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall with that. I'm sure you're only giving me half the story today, Jeremy. Did you talk to Catherine about what to do if you did go?
Oh, I can't remember. I probably need to ask her that, but I suspect she probably wouldn't remember either. I mean, there wasn't. What could you do? I mean, really, what would it? The options were very limited. You couldn't run fast enough. There was no. Where would you go? What protection could you expect? We didn't have bunkers available for wives, or even for ourselves. The protection on the airbase itself was very limited. We had the station bunker, which was supposed to be a nuclear protected bunker with all the air conditioning and survival stuff in there, but it was for a very limited number of people. Very limited. When I went out to Germany for the second time, I was one of the privileged people who would be, in wartime, I was required to be in the bunker and doing my job from there. But yeah, for most people, I don't think, I'm sure I never spoke to Catherine about what to do in the event that I went, and I don't think she ever asked the question. I mean, I think we just...
You both knew the answer, I guess.
I guess, yeah, underneath it all, we did.
So your final tour is at Laarbruch, and you're a wing weapons officer. What are you doing there?
Well, I was sent out as wing weapons officer. It was quite a depressing experience, to be honest, because the post had been occupied by a squadron leader prior to me going out there, and he downgraded the post to flight lieutenant. But frankly, it should have been downgraded to flight sergeant, or less. Because largely it was an administrative job, trying to manage the needs of competing squadrons for range slots. So in fact, the job down at headquarters was done by a flight sergeant. I mean, I did a bit more than that. It's disingenuous to say that's all I did, but I attended Met briefs every morning and was one of the guys who stood up, and I did the NOTAMs, notice to airmen, all that stuff that came out every morning, briefing the squadrons, nothing to do with weapons training. I mean, I was trained. One of my jobs, or actually probably you could say almost my main job, was to provide bomb aiming information for the Buccaneer crews, who had a more sophisticated aeroplane than the Canberra, but in terms of dropping weapons and so on, it was still pretty much an eyeball job, and we still only had 1,000-pound dumb bombs. That's, in a conventional war, and they also carried a nuclear weapon. And for conventional warfare, we were still at World War II, to be honest. I'm talking now 1976, 77, so that period. We were still at World War II because we had no more sophisticated weaponry than a dumb 1,000-pound bomb. And there was no way of dropping that other than by, a visual approach from an IP, an initial point, which was chosen. The target was chosen by by Saka, or would have been chosen by him. So let's say it was a railway station or a bridge. Well, when you're dropping £1,000 bombs, to get it onto a narrow target like a runway or a bridge to destroy it is a really, really difficult task. Because if you imagine, if you went straight down the runway and were 30 feet off to the right, all your bombs would fall 30 feet off to the right, and none of them would damage the runway. Likewise, if you went across the runway at right angles, the chances of actually hitting the runway with one of the bombs that are coming off, let's say at a stick interval of 200 milliseconds or whatever, the chances of one of them hitting the runway would also be very small. So the idea was to attack a target like that using a set of parameters of speed, angle of dive, stick interval between the weapons being released, and the angle of attack, if you like, across the target. So all these, nowadays, of course, you'd have a computer do all of that, but I was the computer. So I was required to give the information. So once the target had been chosen and the crew had chosen their IP, they would be down in the planning room in the bunker, and I would shoot over to my desk with the information that I had about the target and the IP, and then give them the parameters for dropping the bomb, or the bombs, or the stick of bombs that they were carrying. That was my job. And you could say, well, that's quite a tricky thing to do, and it was. And the calculations, because I had O-level maths, I mean, I was not a mathematician. And I put a requisition in for a handheld Hewlett-Packard calculator with all the mathematical functions on it. And I remember the station, I can't remember, the Wing Commander admin or whatever, queried my requisition for this piece of kit, because it was 5,000 quid, which in those days you can imagine £5,000 for a handheld calculator. What do you need this for, Lane? Why are you? Well, unfortunately, sir, my speed of calculation manually would mean that by the time I actually gave the crew the answer, the war would be over. So I need something to do this a little bit quicker. And so anyway, I got the calculator. And the lovely thing is that even on tactical evaluations, people would come in from different parts of the military world to evaluate what you were doing, and nobody could have said whether I was right or wrong, because nobody knew what I did, and nobody knew how to calculate what I was doing. So I was on my own. And it's probably a good thing we never actually went to war, because I suspect the bombers would never have landed anywhere near where they were supposed to go. But there you go. That was life. And I also became the first electronic warfare officer in Germany at wing level, anyway. And we were introducing passive warning radar into the Buccaneer. So when it was designed for the fleet air arm, it didn't have any of that. And of course, we were in an age of very sophisticated anti-aircraft kit on the other side, and the Buccaneer was, when it went out to Germany initially, it was no better than the Canberra in that respect. It had nothing. So wing electronic warfare officer was the job that was combined with my role as wing weapons officer. And actually, I could say it was more interesting in as much as the passive warning radar was retrofitted to the Buccaneer. And would you believe, this is no joke, I'd never flown a Buccaneer. They wouldn't let you fly. Once you were on a ground tour, you were grounded. That was it. No flying. Didn't even go in the simulator. Sorry, there's no time. Can't give you any simulator time because it's being taken up by the crews. So never got in a cockpit. The only time I got into a cockpit of a Buccaneer was when I went up to Bruff, which is where the Buccaneer was made. And I was sent up there to indicate to the designers where where the readout from the passive warning radar should be situated in the pilot's cabin. I have to say, how I ever got tasked to do that, I cannot imagine. That was how ludicrous the Air Force was. I mean, it did make me angry in the end. I hadn't flown this aeroplane, and yet I was sent to Bruff.
Yeah,
I had a very nice tour of the factory, seeing how the Buccaneer was made. And it took me a week, I think, to get there and back. So the Air Force didn't value your time; they just sent you off on a task. And I mean, it was just a sort of ludicrous thing that somebody in a higher position than me thought was a good idea. Anyway, I guess, I must have put it in the right place, but nobody ever changed it, I don't think. So that was pretty much a done deal. But then we got an American pod, which hung on one of the wing stations on the Buccaneer, which was an active jamming pod. And that was a significant advance in the reducing the vulnerability of the aircraft. And so I again I went down to Ramstein, which was the American Air Force base, and this was an American weapon that was going to be put onto the Buccaneer. So I was involved in that aspect of it as well. But it was all retro, if you like, and really I wasn't qualified to do any of this stuff. I really wasn't qualified to do any of it. But hey, we got through the war. I don't know, but I became very disillusioned about the Air Force. They put me to fly target Canberras at West Raynham in Norfolk, a job I did for about 18 months, I suppose. And that was just really waiting for my next posting, which I got, was my posting to the Buccaneer OCU. So I would have been back out to Germany flying Buccaneer. But 2 weeks before I was due to go, they pulled my posting and said, sorry, but Jerry, you're not going there. You're going to go and be wing weapons officer in Germany. And I thought, well, hey, hang on a minute. I obviously had no option but to do what I was told. But when I got there and found that the job was, what's all this about? It's ridiculous.
And what a waste of all the training that they've given you.
Absolutely. But they did this with lots of other people. It wasn't just me, but you could probably say maybe the job that I was doing was a bit more enviable than some others. But it was in my view, pick a name out of a hat. I was told by my squadron commander at West Raynham, who was equally devastated for me that I wasn't going to go to the Buccaneer OCU. But he said to me, Jerry, I understand you're the only guy. You're the only person who is available to do this job with the right history. So, you're just going to have to go. And so go I did, but I became very disillusioned, because of the way in which I was asked. I went to meetings at Emma, completely futile. And it would take me days to get there and back, because the Air Force only had one, what do they call them? I can't remember what they call them now, but anyway, they flew out of Dusseldorf and landed at Brize Norton here. And they were 1 or 2 flights a week, I think, one maybe, one out, one back. And so you'd get a seat on one of these airplanes. So if your meeting was on a Wednesday, but the flight went out on Monday, well, you went out and had to stay a couple of nights in Brize Norton and then take the train into London. And then the next flight would be back on Friday. So it'd take you the whole week to do a 2-hour meeting in MOD. Nobody cared. It was just, you're like fodder. So, and I started to get very disillusioned about that sort of thing. And, they don't value my time. They don't value my training. They don't value what I've done. I think I'm just going to find something else to do. And then the Defence Review, which was done by Dennis Healy in 1974, so we're talking 1976, 77, the Air Force came up with a voluntary redundancy scheme, or a compulsory redundancy scheme for most. And my boss was squadron leader, and 42, I guess, 2 kids, navigator. And I went into his office one day, and he was in tears. He'd got a letter on his desk, and it basically said, "Thank you for your service, your years of service. You've got 3 months, and then you're off." And the guy couldn't believe it. And he was at a time in his life when, well, what the hell am I going to go and do? And I remember going home to my dear wife, Catherine, and I said to her, "Nobody's ever going to do that to me. I'm not going to have that. I'll find something else to do." And in fact, the Air Force never did do another redundancy scheme, but I was in a slot because I was on a ground tour, not flying. I wasn't actively flying. I came into a category of people who could volunteer to go. And so I did. And of course, they lost a lot of good people. The people who volunteered to go thought they could do something else outside. And the ones who didn't volunteer to go were the ones that they kept and had no initiative, if you like. And so they ended up with the worst of all possible worlds. And I was invited to come back later on. They did chase me down and see if I'd like to go, if I'd like to come back. But I'd made my own way in the world. And
so what did you do in Civvy Street? What did you go into?
Well, I did a postgraduate course in Scotland. My wife Scots, and so we decided to. I got a place at university in Dundee, and I did a postgraduate business diploma, and then thought about what I was actually going to do. And a slot came up for, it didn't have resettlement in the way that that you would nowadays, where people would be sort of helped into another job. But I got the opportunity to join IBM, and so in Glasgow, and so I did. My first paycheck with IBM was at least double what I was earning when I was a flight lieutenant in the Air Force on flying pay. And it went on from there. And I stayed with them for 5 years, and then I left and set up my own business and worked at that until I was nearly 70. Well, until I was 70, yeah. Then I retired from my work at 70, and now I'm living the retirement.
Jeremy, you've been really generous with your time. I really appreciate you sharing your story. I've just got one quick question. Tell me about your close encounter with a UFO.
So here I am. I'm at West Raynham now, and I'm flying target Canberras for Lightning, which was still our frontline defence aircraft, and we were doing intercepts. So they would intercept us at high level, pretending to be Russian aeroplanes. That's what we did. And we also pretended, for purposes of air defence of the United Kingdom, we would fly in from different directions, testing the air defences of the UK. So on this particular occasion, I had been detached in Scotland, and we were going to fly back to base. So it was the end of the detachment, and the idea was to fly at night. We were tasked to fly north of the United Kingdom up towards the Shetlands, and then fly back south as if we were Russian aeroplanes, and then fly back to base in Norfolk. So the general operating height was around about 34,000 feet, 36,000 feet, maybe 38. And we were a stream of aircraft, so it wasn't just me. There were the whole of the detachment, so I think something like 8 aircraft were flying in a stream, and I was probably number 4 or 5. And it was a very, very clear night, and we were flying pretty much due north when this shape appeared in the sky above, and I had myself and my navigator, who was in the back, and also another ground crew member I was flying back to West Raynham, so he was in the cockpit with me, and this shape started to appear and was very distinct. It was a sort of Concorde shape wing, if you like, if you can imagine the shape of a Concorde, pointing north-south and with lights pulsating all the way around the perimeter, and pulsating at half-second intervals, something like that. Very, very clear and extraordinary sight. Never seen anything like this before. Anyway, so I reported it to the ground controller who was controlling the airspace, and he said, "Oh yeah, it's been reported by crews who've gone up before you. We're really not sure what it is. You can't see anything on radar. It's 60. They could see up to 60,000 feet with the air defense radars that they had, and nothing could be seen. So it would suggest that this thing was either invisible to radar or very high and large. But of course, you can't tell. You've got no reference point. So we're looking at this thing and saying, well, is that just a couple of thousand feet above us and just quite small, no more than the size of an aircraft like mine, or is it miles away and big? Well, you can't tell because you've got no reference point. So I decided that I would climb the aircraft up. So if we came south and it was still there, I'd be another 10,000 feet higher. The operational height, the maximum height you could fly in a Canberra was about 48,000 feet. So, and it was cold, but a beautiful, beautiful clear night. And so we were coming south, and we'd have been north of Edinburgh. We'd have been somewhere, the Fife, I think, somewhere like that, when we came south. And this thing was still there, still flashing away, still pointing north-south. So the sharp end of the thing was pointing north. And it didn't change size at all. So it was clearly a long way away. So there was no visible change in the size of this thing. And so we by now got all three members of the, they're all up having a look. and very soon when we got underneath it, or not underneath it, but I could see Paris from where I was at nearly 50,000 feet. I could see Paris from Edinburgh or thereabouts. It was such a clear night, extraordinary night. And anyway, this thing suddenly lit up, completely bright light, and within a nanosecond, I mean, just so fast, I saw the flash as it disappeared off into the southern hemisphere, and it was gone. It was just gone. And quite an extraordinary sight. And we came down, everybody came down the stream of aircraft, and the first thing we did when we got down was to get everybody to draw what they'd seen, to make sure it wasn't some kind of, hallucination, if you like. And so we did, and everybody drew the same thing. And so it got put up to headquarters somewhere, I don't know, it ended up, people say there was some desk but nobody ever contacted us to ask us to share any detailed information about it. There's a subsequent bit to this tale, which is that I went up to Kinloss on a trip one day. I remember why I was there, but I was there overnight because I remember sitting with another mate of mine who I'd seen, he was flying Nimrods. And I was recounting this story to him, and he said, "Oh, that's not unusual. We've seen that before. That's been around." So, what do you make of that?
Wow. I mean, the fact you've got multiple corroborations there, mm-hmm. and the clearness of the night, it's not clouds or anything like that. It's you know what things look like in the air.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But I can't explain it. But it was just something out of this world, for sure.
Don't miss the episode extras such as videos, photos and other content. Just look for the link in the podcast information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous support of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and see you next week.